Okay, let's continue the class. So the next topic for today is malicious code or malware. So this is also a familiar topic. So probably you all have some experience about like virus and Trojan horse and so on. So sometimes we may not have malware, but we may have so-called greyware. So greyware will collect our information. Although they will not harm our system, they will collect our like personal information and then send to some server for like analysis and so on. Okay, so we will look at this kind of malicious code. Okay, so the malicious code is different from the vulnerable code. So for vulnerable code, that means they do not intend to harm your computer, but the attacker can try to exploit bugs or vulnerabilities in your code, right? So that's the intention of the code is good, is not for malicious purpose. However, so the malicious code is the designer actually intentionally built those codes to damage your system. So that's why this code must be detected and removed from our computer systems. Right, so some of the malicious code actually they will move because they want to infect other machines and spread across the network. Some will just stay static within your own systems. Right, so and here is just a joke. So the joke says many malware might be created by software like antivirus companies, right? So anyway, so this is just some data about the defense and the attack, the speed. So basically, the attacker nowadays are moving faster than the defenders. So in particular, so this is still some old data, but you can find some numbers in the recent semantic report. So so each year, actually, the semantic and the others, software security companies, they will produce some report to summarize what are the active threats nowadays, and then what are the maybe potential trends in the future. So in the report, we can see actually the attackers are moving faster than the defenders. So in general, so nowadays actually the so-called zero-day vulnerability or zero-day attack actually is increasing in faster ways, and we send defenders to build a patch, right? So the zero-day attack or zero-day vulnerability means when we are aware of the attack, actually the attack is already in place. That means we don't have any time to prepare. With antivirus companies or end users, they don't have any time to prepare. So when we know this kind of attack or vulnerability, actually for example, the virus or malware is already taking action. That means users are already affected by those attacks or malwares. Right. So one particular issue about malware, or sometimes we call greyware. So greyware is basically different from malware. They will not damage your system, but they will try to steal your information and pass your information to, for example, to someone for analysis and so on. So for the Android applications, actually the malware and the greyware are very common. So actually it's predicted that every Android device contains some malware and greyware, because for Android actually you can download the application from anywhere and install the application on your device. So we don't need to check where the source of this where is the source of this application. So right, so some common malware types, we will look at some common malware, and then we will look at their behavior, and then how to categorize or distinguish them. So there we still have some a method that can distinguish whether this is virus or worm. So virus is the most common malware. So virus basically will infect files, but they need some host. So that means the virus is not a standalone program. They will attach they will attach themselves to some host, some like files, right? So this is basically the, and they will try to spread across the network among different machines. So this is the behavior of virus. And the Trojan horse, basically this again require a host. So Trojan horse is basically attached to another piece of like software which look normal. For example, you may attach a keylogger with a game, because when you play game, you also need to recognize the keystroke, right? So you need to recognize the keystroke from the user in order to play the game. So in this case, the behavior is very similar as a keylogger. So keylogger basically will log your input, your key like a keyboard input when you try to visit some website or when you try to log into account. So the behavior actually is similar for a game and a keylogger. So in this case, so basically this malicious software can hide within the game, so people cannot detect, right? So in this case, basically, Trojan horse will still need a host, right? So and then, but Trojan horse usually will not spread. So that means the Trojan horse will just remain in your system. They will not try to affect other machines, right? So worms are some other type of malware. So worms, similar as virus, worm will try to replicate themselves. That means that they will copy themselves and then infect other machines. At the same time, worm does not need a host. So virus will need a host, but worm does not need a host. So this is something different between the worm and the virus. So you can see, these are the big three. So the top three malware types. And there are some other malwares, for example, the backdoors or trapdoors, right? So these are the malware. So sometimes we may call it greyware, not malware. They try to steal user information without user awareness. For example, if you encrypt some file, you send the encrypt file to another user, and then if there is a backdoor or trapdoor inside, that means actually someone can decrypt your encrypted message even without knowing your secret key. So this is used in, for example, in the mass surveillance, right? So in US and in UK, so the mass surveillance actually sometimes they use backdoor to open the encrypted email. So even if you send email in encrypted form, the agency, actually the secrecy agency, they can open your email without knowing the secret key because they plant some backdoor in your encryption mechanism. So this is one. So we can treat this as malware because a greyware, because they do not cause damage to your system. They just want to see your secret information. Logic bombs. So this can be part of another type of malware. So basically, logic bomb will take action when certain condition actually is true, is met, right? Spyware, so this is similar as trapdoors. They may collect your information, and then we also have a zombie bot, they will try to affect other machines and to make the machine become a zombie machine for denial service attack. Okay, and the ransomware. This is a recent type of new malware. So in particular, the crypto ransomware, they will encrypt the user's machine. That means so if you say accidentally download something containing this ransomware, then basically the ransomware will encrypt your hard disk, your machine. Then you need to do the payment. So only when you do the ransom payment, you will get the decryption key to unlock your machine. Right. So one typical example is WannaCry. Right. So it's a web. It's a quite well-known ransomware. Right, so this is one example. So actually sometimes the attacker will try to fool the user. So this one actually try to fool user, say the user used the machine to do some illegal transaction or illegal actions. Then they need to pay the ransomware, the ransom payment in order to unlock the machine. So, and also the attacker try to produce some fake web page for the police. And then they try to fool the victim to believe, right? So the machine has been used to do something illegal. Then they will pay the ransomware to unlock the machine. And then actually the attacker require payments in like electronic form. So they accept like a Bitcoin. Like actually WannaCry accept Bitcoin for the ransom payment. Because Bitcoin usually it's difficult to trace who the attacker is, right? So that's some recent attack. Yes?
Okay, so then even if you pay them, will the system get unlocked?
They will give you the key to unlock your system.
Then even if you did pay them and you get a key, will it still work?
Sorry?
I mean, will the unlock key still work?
What key?
The code to unlock the computer, to unlock the virus.
No, they just unlock your machine. Yeah. So if you give basically they use ransomware to encrypt your machine, right? Your like hard disk. Then if you give them the payment, then they will give you a key. Then you can decrypt all the content in the original content in your machine. So the key is just to unlock this encryption, so that you can get back all the data. Because otherwise, all your data are encrypted, so you cannot access your data anymore, right? So that's basically the attacker use different ways to hide like tracing. They use like Bitcoin, so that you cannot trace like who actually received the payment. And they also use some other technique like the anonymous routing, like the Tor, the onion routing, to hide the IP address. So you even don't know where the IP address of the attacker comes from. So in this case, the attacker actually they can hide their identity, right? So this is some recent like malware produced, and then here I show a picture to distinguish different types of malware. So some of them need a host, right? Some of them are independent. So this can be used to distinguish, for example, virus and worm. Right? Virus will need a host, worm does not need a host. And Trojan horse will also need a host. Logic bomb as well, because logic bomb will hide within a program, and until some condition is met, then the logic bomb will take action. And then some of them actually can replicate. That means they will copy themselves and then infect other machines. For example, the zombie worm and the virus, they will all do replication and then infect other machines. Right. So this is just one example to show that actually the virus can be attached in email attachment. For example, in a Word file, you can have a virus. Right. So this is a warning from the university to tell people don't to open in this case it's a zip file. Don't open the zip file because it contains some virus. And for the current popular or active virus, so for the current active virus, you can find them in the so-called wild list. So wild list means the virus is in the wild. That means that the virus actually is active. So you can find basically the list of virus in the website. So the wild list website, actually they provide so they will update. For example, some virus may be active maybe 2 years ago, but nowadays actually such kind of virus is already no longer active because antivirus can detect and remove all these kind of virus. Then they will be removed from the list. So the list is a extensive list of currently active virus. We call them wild virus. So how do viruses work? Basically, the virus will contain several components. Of course, one of the core components is the spreading mechanism, so the infection mechanism. So they will try to infect other machines and infect other files, right? So in this case, so if one file is infected, and then if you open a file, the virus basically will try to infect other files in your system, and in this case, if you basically pass this other file, any file to another machine, then the other machine will again be infected. Right, so this is one of the major components. The infection mechanism is in one of the major components. And the infection can be done to files, but also can do this infection in the memory. So they can infect some object in the memory, but they cannot be a standalone program in memory. They can infect some other program in the memory. So basically, the virus is some sort of machine code, right? Similar as the machine code we saw in the buffer overflow. So they will attach them as part of an executable file, for example. So in this case, of course, there are some other viruses like a macro virus. They will be embedded in the Office document. But in general, many viruses they will be in the form of executable file, binary code. Then they will attach them because the binary code contains all the instructions, right? So if you still remember, we looked at the binary code for the program which opens a shell. So this kind of binary code can be attached to another executable file. And then when you execute that file, actually the virus will also be executed. And so in most of the situations, actually the virus will not just infect the files. They will also infect objects which are in the memory. So in this case, even if you close the file, so the virus actually can still infect other objects because they are in the memory. So that's why for many like a scanner, antivirus scanner, they always scan the memory first. So when you do the scanning for the whole system, they always scan the memory, all the programs you are running. So to first remove those virus, then they will scan the rest of the files. Because even if you say remove some virus from one file, but the virus is in memory, then actually later this file can be infected again. So in this case, we need to first remove the virus in the memory before we remove it from other files in the system. So in this case, actually, if we have this so-called memory residential virus, then even if you close some file, they can still infect other objects. And the infection mechanism is to basically to spread virus. However, so there are some other there can be some other content inside memory. In particular, we have a payload and a trigger. So payload basically is real malicious actions that will be performed by the virus. And the trigger is a condition. So you can set a trigger to specify under what condition the payload will be executed. So infection is by default. So virus will always infect different files, different objects. So infection is something default, but the payload can be based on a condition. Only when some condition is met, then the payload will be delivered. Right. So in this case, actually, if we have the trigger and the payload, essentially we have a logic form within the virus because so it will infect other objects. On the other hand, there is a condition. If the condition is true, then some malicious action will be performed. So it's essentially if you have a payload and trigger, you have a logic form within the virus. So this is basically the complete pseudocode for a virus, right? So first it will just try to infect objects in the memory and then infect other objects in the file, right? So then you can also have the condition for the trigger. If the trigger condition is true, then you can deliver the payload. So this is a simple pseudocode to illustrate the structure of a virus. Right, so the virus also has a lifetime, so it has a so-called dormant phase. That means the virus is idle when you don't activate or execute some file. For example, if the virus is attached to your email, attached to an email sent to you, if you do not open the attachment, then the virus is in a dormant phase. That means it's inactive. But when you open the attachment, or when you run a file, or when you insert, for example, a USB or something into the computer, and then in this case, if the virus is activated, then it will go to the propagation phase. That means it will start to infect other objects, right? So the infection is default. So whenever you activate the virus, it will infect other objects in the memory and in the hard disk. And then there can also be some trigger like the payload. So if say the condition of the trigger is met, then the payload will be executed. So these are the 4 lifetime faces for the virus. So to classify the virus, actually we can use, for example, the target. So where the virus will reside. For example, it can be in the, so the common one is the file infected, right? So it will be a part of the file. So the virus will attach it as part of the file. Then whenever you run the file, then the virus will be activated. And there are some others, for example, the boot sector. So this kind of virus will reside in the boot sector. When you mount a drive, for example, when you insert a USB or when you try to mount a drive, if the virus is in the boot sector, then when you try to read the contents of the drive, then the virus will be activated. And there are also macro virus. So this is in particular, this kind of virus is for Microsoft Office documents. So Word, Excel, and so on. So nowadays, if you open a Word or Excel which contains macro, then basically the system will give you a warning. And if you are sure this is not harmful, so this is like a real, the correct file you want to open, then you can run the macros, because macro can do some programming, simple programming to help you deal with data in the Excel and so on. But if the macro contains the virus, then the virus will be activated, right? So, and the scripting virus, so similar as macro, you can use again JavaScript, VB and so on. They can be used to produce virus. For example, in HTML file or in other objects that can allow this kind of scripting code to exist, right? So we can also classify virus according to the method they try to hide them, right? So because if the virus basically use a static form, actually the virus is easy to detect, because once we know this pattern, for example, we can extract the machine code, right? So if the virus is static, then we can extract the machine code of the virus and then use this one to detect it. So if the file contains this segment of code, that means this is an infected file, right? So however, so the virus actually will use different ways, right? So for example, they will do encryption, they will try to do compression, because they will try to compress the file to make the file size unchanged. Polymorphic, metamorphic, these are related to the so-called obfuscation. They will try to hide their format by using the so-called obfuscation technique. Obfuscation can be used for good purpose. For example, you can hide your program. When you do some programming task, for example, you design some software or some website, you can actually use obfuscation to hide your code so that people cannot steal your source code. On the other hand, it can also be used by malware. Basically, they will do obfuscation to change their looking every time. So in this case, if you just use one pattern to find the virus, you cannot detect it, right? So these are the so-called polymorphic and metamorphic virus. So we will look at some examples. Okay, so and we can also use the way the virus is delivered to classify the virus, right? So boot sector infectors. So these are the virus that will reside in the boot sector. That means whenever the drive is mounted, then the virus will be activated, right? So this kind of virus is very popular when we still use the floppy disk, like in the old days, because the floppy disk actually, you can, if you use a floppy disk in an infected machine, then the machine actually, the virus can infect this floppy disk. Later, when you use a floppy disk in a different machine, then the other machine will be infected. So nowadays, actually, the floppy disk is no longer popular because the size is, the floppy disk is quite big. So, but the storage actually is quite small, only 1.4 or 1.5 megabytes for one floppy disk. But nowadays, actually, USB becomes the target. So if you insert your USB disk drive into a machine, and if the machine is infected, so USB can also be infected. So file infector is one of the common type of virus. So in this kind of virus, they will attach them to the usually is an executable file, because these are the codes that can be executed. And the virus is also will be also basically we also insert the virus as some executable file inside this original exe file, for example. So in this case, when you execute this program or this file, then the virus actually will be executed, because we just directly put the machine code here. Similar as in the buffer overflow, so if you put some machine code in the memory and you return the control to the memory, then the code will be wrong. So similarly, here if you put the machine code directly in an exe file, and then when someone tries to run this exe file, then the virus will be activated. So macro virus is also another type of virus, so different from the previous one. Macro virus, you don't need to put the machine code, you just put the malicious code using the macro language. Right? So macro language is very popular in Office, like Office documents. You can write some use macro language to perform some automated job. Right? So you don't need to manually do some calculation. You can use the macro to do the calculation automatically. So it's very easy to use. But on the other hand, the attacker can also use this kind of macro language to produce some virus. So if your like Excel file contains a macro, which is a macro virus, then when you activate, so when the system asks you whether you want to activate the macro or not, you click yes, then the virus will be activated. Alright, so the macro language are very easy to learn, because it's much easier than like a C or C++. So if you have programming background, probably maybe 1 day or half day. So you are given some example, then you can follow the example to write the code. It's very easy to use. Right. So one typical example is this Malicious virus. So this virus actually probably is one of the most well-known virus. Actually, this is a virus based on using this Visual Basic for applications. Right. So this one actually is still widely used, because this language is very easy to use. So you can use VBA to create a macro inside the file, and then of course the attacker can also use this tool to create a virus and then attach the virus in the file. Right. So the following example is like a part of the Malicious virus. So basically, this shows how the Malicious virus will infect different users. So basically, it will use some macro command, macro like functions to read the address book. So if the machine is infected, this macro will read the address book of Outlook, and then it will retrieve the contact list, and then it will send email to the people in the contact list and attach itself as an attachment. So in this case, basically, if anyone who open the attachment, then this macro will again infect that machine, and then it will again retrieve the contact list and then send the email to other users. Right. So this is the part of the Malicious virus, the code. So basically, it will create like an Outlook object, and then it will first check whether the machine is infected or not. So in the registry, so if the machine is infected, some entry will be added into the registry of the machine. So if the machine is infected, that means then this virus will just stop its function. But if the machine is not infected, then it will try to basically retrieve the address book. So it will try to find out the contacts in the address list, and then it will use a for loop to send emails to the addresses in the address book, and then the virus will be will be put in the attachment of the email, and then other people, if they open the email, then open the attachment, then they will be infected as well. So this is how the infection can be done by using email as a tool. So you can see actually the code is very easy to write. If you are familiar with all these functions, it's very easy to write this kind of code. Okay, so similar as the VBA, actually the JavaScript and the VB script, these kind of scripting language are also easy to use, easy to learn. And we also can use a lot of functions available for this kind of scripting language to write some like a virus. So it's somehow similar as the macro virus, the VBA used to create the macro virus. So, for example, you can also now, if you use JavaScript or VB script, so you can basically put the virus in a HTML web page. So in this case, if you open the web page and you allow the active content to be run, then if the active content actually is a virus, then your machine again will be infected. So nowadays, actually, all the browser will, by default, will block the active content. You can still enable the content. So this is one simple example written in VB script. So this example will basically first check whether the user is running like a offline like a page or not. So if it is an offline page, then basically this VB script will try to go through all the folders from the current folder to the root folder. So all the folders from the current directory to the root folder, it will go through all those like directories, and then it will basically infect all the other files inside directories. Right. So you can see here, it's quite easy actually to create such a piece of code. So basically, it will first search whether you are running when you run this HTML. So basically, the code will search. So if the HTML starts with this prefix, that means you are using an offline web page, right? So in this case, then it will try to find the parent path, get the path, and then it will use a for loop, a while loop, to traverse all the parent folders, and then it can infect all the files within those folders, right? So this is a very simple piece of code, and because we have again a lot of functions available for us to use, so this kind of virus can be written also very easily. So this explains what is going on in the code. Okay, so basically, if you have some like code like this in the web page, so if you open it, actually the system will give you some warning. So it says there is active content inside the like web page. And similarly, when you open email Excel with the macro, it will also give you a warning and saying that there is macro inside. So do you want to continue or not? So if you click yes, then it depends on what's the content, active content. It can be useful, like some useful like code for you to do some job, or it can be some malicious code. Right. So in the previous example, actually, we just traverse through all the folders within from the infected file from this HTML file to the root folder. But actually, we can do some other activities. For example, you can, in this case, actually you can modify a batch file, right? So you can modify this batch file. You can basically insert some additional command inside the batch file. So when this batch file is executed, then basically the malicious command will be executed, right? So this is one example. You can also create some directory, right? So you can, in this case, you can create a directory. So you can see actually this kind of code is very easy to use because for like a scripting language, including like some other language like HTML and so on. So they are very easy and very like flexible to use because we have a lot of functions available for us to use. Okay, so this kind of language actually can be used by people without computer science background. So they even those people, they can write the code because they are quite easy to follow, and the format actually is not very strict. So they don't have a very strict syntax, right? So it can also, for example, open shell, right? So it can open shell, and then after you open shell, of course, similar as the buffer flow, if you open shell, then you can do a lot of malicious actions. Okay. Okay, so that's basically some examples about virus. Right. So next we will look at how virus can hide themselves. Right. So when we categorize virus, so we can use where is the location or where is the target of the virus. We can also use the way the virus try to conceal themselves against the defending technology. For example, the virus scanner. Right. So one popular way used by the virus is to do encryption, because if we know, so if we have the same a piece of code, but if we do the encryption, then using different key, then in this case, the encrypted virus will be different every time, right? So even if you have the same decryption or encryption algorithm, but if you change the key every time, then the encrypted virus will be different. All right. So in this case, actually, you don't just insert the virus, but you insert this piece of code. So this piece of code includes the encrypted virus and also the decryption code. Right. So when you run this infected file, the decryption code will be first executed, and then it will use a key to decrypt this part, and then it will run the decrypted virus. So in this way, actually, it can prevent the scanner to identify the virus. So the first generation antivirus scanning. So later we will see, for the first generation antivirus scanner, they actually cannot deal with this kind of encryption virus, because first generation only can scan the signature or the pattern. But if the pattern change every time, then you cannot really detect the virus. So this is one simple example to illustrate how encryption can be done. So in this case, we do not need to use very complex encryption. We just use some very simple mechanism to obfuscate the virus. So you can treat this as obfuscation instead of encryption, because encryption usually we use very complicated method to hide the content, but here we don't really want to hide the content. We just want the content to change the looking every time. So you can use a very simple encryption. So you can see here the encryption is essentially XOR. So every byte, you take one byte, you do XOR, you update the counter, you update this key, right? So this counter basically will point to the current location of the virus. So every time you encrypt one byte and you update this key by using RE+1. So RE is used the encryption key used to hide the virus. So it's very simple, because the purpose is just to hide the virus, not to change the looking of the virus, instead of preventing someone to decrypt the virus. So here we just want to avoid detection instead of making the content very secret. And then another way to hide the virus is to do compression. So why compression? Because if you attach a virus to a file, then the size of the file actually will change. So in this case, in order to make sure the file size remains unchanged, then the virus will do the compression. Right. So this is a pseudocode from the textbook. Right. So basically, the virus will try to infect the object, but it will first check whether, for example, a program is infected or not. Right? So it will put some label here, similar as the Malicious virus. If the label is there in the file, then basically the virus will stop infection, because the file is already infected. But if the label is not there, then it will infect the file. But before the virus infects the file, it will first compress the file. Then we'll attach the virus to the infected file to make sure the size actually does not change. Right. So these are some mechanisms that can be used by virus to hide their existence. And then the polymorphic virus actually is another more advanced obfuscation. I should say I would use the term obfuscation. Basically, the encryption virus is you can still have the same decryption code within the virus, right? Because the decryption code actually is unchanged, but the virus encrypted will change. So in this case, you can even hide the decryption code. For example, you can add some dummy operation. to make the code different every time. But eventually, the function formed by the code is the same. So this is some common technique used in obfuscation as well. So if you have a piece of code, you don't want people to do reverse engineering and identify your original code, you can do the obfuscation by. So anti-dummy operation is probably one of the most straightforward approach. But there is more advanced approach for obfuscation. Right, so if you look at the previous slide, one of the slides, we look at the encryption virus, right? So it will encrypt the virus and then to make the virus different by using different key. If the key is different, the virus is encrypted virus is different. However, in this case, the decryption algorithm is still the same. But now in polymorphic virus, actually it can make the decryption code, the decryption like algorithm, the decryption like subroutine change every time. So this is basically the same code we have seen in the previous slide, but we add a lot of dummy operations here. So these dummy operations, they will make no effect, right? So however, the code looks very different. So now if say you try to use the decryption code to detect whether there is a virus, because virus is encrypted, you can no longer use a pattern. But you can use a pattern of the decryption function. If the decryption function exists, that means there is a virus. But now if say you use this kind of obfuscation, then the decryption function, the code for the decryption function will also change every time. So because we can add a lot of redundant operations which take no effect. But the code, when you compile this code into a machine code, the machine code becomes completely different. So in this case, the whole you have a different decryption function code, the code for decryption function. You have different encrypted virus. You have different key every time, so the entire pattern is different. So in this case, it can avoid some scanner to detect the virus. Then the metamorphic virus actually is even more powerful. It's a higher order of a polymorphic virus. So in this case, instead of simply adding some redundant operation, then it can completely rewrite itself, right? So this is basically the most powerful approach to hide the virus, right? So basically that's all about the virus. We look at some general structure of the virus. So there are several major components, and then we look at some example. For example, the macro virus, like a script virus, and then how virus actually can hide themselves to avoid detection. Right. So the next part we will look at. So basically we will look at the top three, the major three: virus, Trojan horse, and worm. Right. For other malware, we will just briefly mention them. So for Trojan horse, actually this is another type of malware. So this kind of malware actually sometimes is more difficult to detect compared with virus, because it will usually reside in a normal program, right? So in this case, some behavior of the program actually is similar as the action performed by the Trojan horse, like in a computer game, right? So this is Trojan horse comes from the story, right? So you know the story. The soldiers they hide themselves inside the Trojan horse in order to bypass the checking, and then they can attack the city, right? So basically, the Trojan horse will have two effects. One is the so-called overt effect. That's basically the document effect. For example, this is a computer game. But then it will also have some covert effect, which is the secret effect. In this case, this Trojan horse may try to steal your user credentials. For example, there are different types of Trojan horse. One type of Trojan horse is web Trojan. So web Trojan basically will monitor. For example, whenever you open a browser and go to for example, bank website, then the web Trojan will start to work. So for example, it can open a pop-up window. So in this case, if the user is not is fooled by this pop-up window, then the user may type username password in the pop-up window. And then actually the content is not sent to the web server, it's sent to the Trojan horse. Then the Trojan horse actually collect the user credential. So nowadays, actually, we also prevent the web page to open pop-up because web Trojan actually can produce such kind of fake pop-up to ask the user to give like confidential information. Right. So there are also some methods to avoid detection. So of course, if say the Trojan horse has a fixed pattern, then we can still detect the Trojan horse quite easily. But actually, Trojan horse will also apply some similar technique as the virus. For example, it can use encryption or use a polymorphic method. And another method actually is to use just use the data. For example, you can put the source code inside some document, because when you do the scanning, if you only scan the machine code, then you will never find this Trojan horse in the text format, because you can have a text format document, and then actually the Trojan horse because it's within another piece of software, so it can just compile the source and run the Trojan horse on the fly. You don't need to insert the machine code inside the machine. You can just put the code in the text format, and then you compile it on the fly, and then you can avoid the detection if you use some scanner to scan particular pattern. Right. So you can also use some other tool available in the operating system. For example, you can use a debug tool. Right. So debug tool actually is a powerful tool for attackers. Right. So you can also use Trojan horse to basically to assist other attacks. Right. So you can use Trojan horse to do the remote administration. That means for example, the Trojan horse may open a port, and then this port allow attacker to connect to your machine using this port. Right. So the Trojan horse may also plant some backdoor inside your program, and then it can also do the network redirection and so on. So essentially, if the Trojan horse is within your system, then actually it can assist many other attacks. Right. So it can be used as a point of the attacker can use to launch other attacks. Okay, so that's about Trojan horse, and then worms. Worms actually is different from Trojan horse. Basically, it does not need a host. It will just infect other machines, like other networks, by replicating itself. Okay, so and different from virus, the worms does not. So different from Trojan horse and virus, worm does not need a host. However, so similar as virus, worms will replicate themselves. So we will look at one example. This is a so-called slammer worm. So this is a worm against the SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server. So this is basically the status before this worm actually is active. So 30 minutes later, actually you can see the majority of the world is infected by the worm. Right? So why this like infection is so fast? Because the infection essentially is exponential. So basically what does this worm perform is when it infects SQL Server, so it will generate random IP address, and then this random IP address will be used to send the worm to another machine. Right? So basically the worm just use a loop to generate random addresses and then attach itself and then send to other machines using the random address. So in this case, actually, if one machine is infected, later it will infect, say, a set of machines. Then each machine in a set now becomes a source that will again infect a set of machines. So it's similar as like the social network, like Facebook, right? So you can connect to different people very quickly. So the growth actually is exponential, right? So actually, this is worm based on the UDP protocol, because in UDP actually, so why we use UDP? Because the worm will try to send itself to different machines as quickly as it could. Because in this case, UDP will be the best choice. So the worm essentially can pick a random IP address, prepare a package, put itself in the packet, send it, then that's it. You pick another IP address, and then you insert the worm and then send the packet. So you don't need to, if you use TCP, then you need to do the handshake, right? In this case, if you use UDP, you just pick a random IP address, send the packet, and that's it. You don't need to care how the packet is delivered and so on. Right, so here is basically the code. Again, this is the machine code, and you may have some similar. You may have some feeling this is similar as the buffer overflow, because you can see here. So this kind of pattern, and here I have a lot of 90, 90, 90. So you may have a feeling that this is something related to buffer overflow, but actually this is indeed buffer overflow. Basically, the worm will use buffer overflow to attack the to infect the to let this infected host send the worm to other hosts. Right. So we can have some brief explanation about this worm. So this is the UDP packet header. Right, so this basically this byte will signal the SQL server to store the packet in the buffer. Right, so now once the content is stored in the buffer, you try to use a buffer overflow. You try to fill the buffer using some dummy input. Right, so after that, okay, you change the return address. So now the return address is changed. Then basically this return address is changed to point to another position where actually the worm is. So you can see here 909090. This is where we start the malicious code. Basically, the return address now will be changed to jump to this position. So actually, if you jump to any position here, the worm will be activated, because this is the same as in the previous example. You have a list of no operation here. So if you jump to any position here, then eventually this malicious code will be executed. Right. So this is where the functions are put inside the packet. So basically, in this, this part contains the functions that will prepare the packet payload. It will basically set the seed of the pseudo-random generator and so on. And then this is the main function, basically the main loop. It will use the functions to generate a random IP address, then prepare a packet, and then send the packet. Then after that, you generate another IP address. So you just use a loop to generate multiple packets and then send to different packets. So in this case, the worm just send to random IP address. So if the IP address exists, then the server will be infected. If it does not exist, then basically the packet will be lost eventually. Right. So this is how this worm works. Actually, it uses the same technique we saw in the previous topic, the buffer overflow. Okay. Right. So in this case, if one machine is infected, then it will start to infect a set of machines. So the growth actually can be exponential. Right. So the top three actually we have looked at all of them, and then there are some other type of virus or malware, for example, the so-called bacteria. So bacteria basically is some malware that will just burn the resource, right? So you can just have a while loop to create infinitely many directories within a system. So you can just burn the hard disk of the machine, and then logic bomb. So this can be part of a virus, right? So actually, logic bomb is used by many insiders. So if you search on the internet, you can find many stories about logic bomb launched by insiders. So some people say we put a piece of code within the system, some insider. So basically, the code will in the dominant phase until certain action, certain condition is met. For example, if some employee actually is fired by the company, they plant some logic bomb, and when some condition is met, then actually the logic bomb will take action. So you can find some stories in real stories in the internet about using logic bomb to either steal information or cause damage to the company. So maybe some insider they try to harm the system of the employer. Alright, so depends how to defend malware. Basically, there are different approaches, and some of them are just theoretical. So theoretically, this kind of approach can work, but in practice, we don't really use them. But some mechanisms actually are practical mechanisms. So the first defense is actually to treat. Potential method is to treat all the content, all the information in the system as data. So we don't distinguish code and data. In this case, so we can just simply treat everything as data. So if someone wants to execute the code, basically you need to first pass the verification done by some authority. For example, the operating system can have some object that will do this kind of checking. Right, so this is basically because the virus can infect because they can execute itself. Right, so in this case, if we treat the instructions as data, that means even if you have some virus, so we will treat them as data. So it's somehow similar as the encoding we have seen in the cross-site scripting, right? Cross-site scripting, we have some malicious code. If you treat the malicious code as program, then of course it will damage the system. But if you treat the malicious code just as data, then it will not cause any damage. So the similar concept as in the cross-site scripting. So if we use, you can use some method to let the system treat the instruction as data, not as a real instruction, then you can prevent the instruction to cause damage. Right. So second part is actually to restrict the domain the virus can spread. So in this case, basically, we can make sure the virus, although the virus may still be infect some object, but the domain will be restricted, right? So we can use some mechanism to limit the domain the virus can infect, right? So there are some mechanisms. So again, some of them are used. For example, sandboxing is used in different applications. For example, many browsers, they also have this plugin for sandboxing. That means when you open some page, actually if there is active content will be put in the sandbox. And the sandbox now is a quarantined environment, isolated environment. Then the code actually will only execute in sandbox. Then the behavior of the code will be sent to the anti-malware company to do the matching. Essentially, there will be a blacklist. For example, for certain behavior, this is blacklisted. And then if, say, you have sandbox environment for the active content, the content match the signature of this one of the blacklisted malware, then basically this active content will be treated as malicious content. So actually some browser, if you search like a Firefox, Google Chrome, those browsers actually they also provide some facility for the sandboxing to detect whether the active content is malicious or not. So, but usually the detection is based on the blacklist. So only the known malicious code can be detected. If it's a new type, then the sandboxing environment, although when you study the malicious code, actually you cannot identify this is one of the blacklisted malicious code. Right, so reducing the write, this is basically to relate to access control. So if you restrict, for example, if say the virus is attached to a program, remember, so if you run the program, actually the process you created only will have your own, the permission of the user who executes this program. Unless, of course, you have set UID, then the program will have, the process will have the permission of the owner, maybe the root user. But if you have the normal permission, then, for example, this file is owned by this program is owned by the root user, but the set UID is not used. Then if you run this program, the program will only have your permission, not the root user permission. Right, so in this case, reducing the write can be linked to the principle of least privilege. So if you assign the least privilege for a user to run the program, then even if there is malicious code, it will only have the least privilege, same as the user who executes the code. And the information flow matrix, this is one method, but this method is not really widely used because it's theoretically actually it can work, but it will affect the availability. So the user friendliness of the system will be affected. So how does this information flow matrix work? So essentially it will restrict the boundary, restrict the domain where the virus or malware can spread, right? So essentially we, in this case, we just calculate the distance. So when a subject, actually object is moved from one location to another location, for example, a virus attach itself to another object, then the flow distance will increase. So every hop, every time the virus infect an object, then the flow distance will increase. Then you can set a threshold. Basically, for each user, you can set a threshold. For example, for this user, all the objects this user access, the flow distance must be below the threshold. So in this case, if the virus want to infect multiple objects, then the flow distance will restrict this infection. So essentially, you set a boundary to restrict the domain the virus can spread. So this is how the information flow metric can work. So here is one example. So suppose you have 3 people, A, B, C, and then you have the threshold. So A will have threshold 3, B and C have threshold 2. So now suppose A have a program which is say infected by virus. Now if B, so say A allow B and C to execute this program. So when B execute this program, then actually the virus will infect another object, because at this moment, originally the virus has a flow distance 0. But when it infects another object, then this virus in this object Q will have a flow distance 1. Right? So when Q try to infect another object, then for example, X, then the virus in the X will have flow distance 2. So basically, whenever an infected object infects another one, then the flow distance will increase. So in this case, if there is a threshold, then we can restrict the infection. Because say Q is infected, but now Q actually has flow distance 1 because the virus has attached itself to Q from P. So if virus copy itself from P to Q, then the Q's flow distance will increase to 1. And if Q try to infect another object, then the flow distance will increase to 2. However, we have a threshold 2. That means this infection will be disallowed because the flow distance will increase, will be greater than or equal to the threshold. So we only allow, say, this kind of a copy to this kind of a copy operation to succeed when the flow distance is below the threshold. Right, so this is one way to restrict the domain the virus can spread. However, so in this case actually, because P actually has a flow distance 0, so if say someone execute P again, then the virus will still flow. Right, so basically we restrict the number of hops the virus can spread. So that's the idea. Right, reducing the write, and I said this is related to the principle of least privilege. Maybe I just go through this part quickly. Right, sandboxing, and then as I said, so if you can have some sandboxing environment when you run some program, so when you open a web page or open a file, say if there is active content, if you can put the active content in sandboxing environment, and then you can check whether the this piece of script is consistent with one of the malware in the blacklist in the database, right? So in this case, if there is a match, then you can just delete this file or quarantine this file. Okay, so this is sandboxing. So how to detect? So in the virus part, we look at some technique the virus used to avoid detection, and this kind of technique can be used in Trojan horse or other malware as well. Alright, so to detect the virus, actually we can look at different aspects of course, the simplest way is to scan a pattern. So this is actually what the first generation antivirus software performs. So it will scan a particular pattern and see whether this pattern appears in other files or not. However, this approach may not work, right? Because virus can encrypt itself, can change its form. So actually later, in the later generation, so we use other technique to do the detection. For example, we can monitor the behavior of the virus, not just the pattern of the virus. All right, so we will look at some technique used to detect virus. So one negative result is it is proven that we can not decide in 100% accuracy whether a program is virus or not. So unfortunately, there is no antivirus software that can detect all the virus. So this is something some negative results. Right. So one way, again, actually, without using some a scanner, we can also do some detection by using some other method. For example, one of the approaches proposed in the literature was to use this so-called multi-copy testing. So you don't just store the program for one copy, you store it for several copies. And then every time, actually, you can run several copies and compare the result. So here, result is not just the result of the output. You can also compare, for example, the running time, the resource required, for example, the memory size, the stack size. So if, say, all the programs, they have consistent behavior and output, then there is no infection. But say, if one of them actually deviate from other copies, then maybe the one that is different is infected, maybe other, the rest of the programs, they are infected. So if something is different, then you can detect. Signature scanning, this is what we use in antivirus software. So we scan the signature. But as I said, so if we just scan the pattern, it may not really work. So this is basically an example of the first generation scanner, right? So it will just extract the machine code from the virus. So basically you can extract the machine code from virus, and then the machine code becomes a signature. So you scan this piece of code in different objects. If the code exists, the sequence exists, then this is treated as an infected file. However, so if the virus encrypts itself or change its format every time, then basically this kind of scanner will not work, right? So then later actually we use some other method. So if we have a encrypted virus or polymorphic virus, then this kind of scanning will fail, right? And then in the later generation, actually we use some other technique, right? For example, the second generation will not just detect the signature for the virus, but also some code associated with this virus. For example, if you use decryption virus, then you can detect whether there is a decryption code within the file or not. So if there is a particular piece of code which is responding to a decryption operation, because for decryption, actually there are some specific operation. For example, XOR. XOR is a particular operation that will be used in decryption function. So basically, if you can detect there is some decryption code within a program or within an object, then you can treat this as a potential infected virus. However, so this may not really work if we have polymorphic and also metamorphic virus, because they don't just change the pattern of the virus, they also change the decryption code by using redundant operation or by rewriting the whole decryption piece of decryption code. All right, so the second generation actually also use combine this detection using some specific operation like compression, decryption, and also this integrity checking. So basically, we check whether the integrity of a piece of code is preserved or not. Right. So you can, for example, use different parameters. You can use some checksum. You can use a crypto checksum, like a message authenticated code, to make sure when some code is changed, some program is changed, you can detect this change by checking the verification tag. And you may also use the time. For example, the timestamp. So you can keep the timestamp when this file is last changed. And if some file actually is changed after this timestamp, then you can identify this file may be potentially infected by a virus. Right, so the third generation basically will detect the behavior, because if we only look at the pattern or look at the signature, or even if we only look at the whether there is compression, decryption, it does not work, because virus will try to use different methods to bypass this kind of detection. So then the third generation basically look at the behavior of the malware or virus. Right, so the first generation then combine actually different techniques. Right, so the last component is a digital immune system. So this is the last part. Maybe we spend 3 minutes to talk about it. So this was originally proposed by IBM and subsequently used by Symantec. So Symantec is one of the biggest security company in the world. So this simulates the immune system we use in the health system. Right, so basically, in the health system, if say a virus is discovered, then this virus will be sent to the laboratory for analysis. Then the vaccine will be developed. Then all the machines will inject all the people will inject the vaccine, and then they will be immune to the virus. So to simulate this process in the digital world, we have this digital immune system. Right. So here is like the antivirus company. It's something similar as the laboratory to study the real virus. And then for each network, we have some administrative machine which have some sort of a server copy of the antivirus software. And each client will have the client version. Right, so the client version, basically the client will do the, for example, scanning, do the monitoring of the system. Right? So if the virus is known, that means actually, if the virus is known, that means that all these client copies, they can identify the virus, then there is no big deal, because you can see the antivirus client can simply quarantine the file or delete the file. But if say there is some new malicious code, maybe a suspicious code detected, then this must be done. The development of the vaccine should be done very quickly. So in this case, if some clients detect there is a potential new version, say, of the virus, then this will be sent to the administration machine. And the administration machine basically will forward this one. The administration machine may do further analysis to make sure this is not a false alarm. Right? So here we can also have a false positive and a false negative. Then if the administration machine actually cannot really identify, then it will be sent to the antivirus company, like the laboratory. So then this piece of potentially malicious code will be put in a sandbox, in a quarantine environment. And then, of course, the antivirus company will do the study. So finally, some signatures or some method to detect and prevent this virus will be derived. So we call it prescription. So this is similar as a vaccine in our health system. So then this one will be sent to all the networks, all the machines. And then if this virus tries to affect other machines, then this can be prevented. So the other machines, they are already immune to this kind of new virus. So this is basically how the digital immune system works. So it's similar as the immune system, the antivirus system we use in the health system. That means we want to have basically the purpose is to have a rapid response, a quick response for some new virus. If some new virus occurs, we want to develop the vaccine or the prescription as quick as we can, so that we can inject a vaccine for other machines not infected. So in this case, the virus cannot widely spread among the different networks. All right. So the procedures I just mentioned. So you can have a look at the procedures here. So the same procedure I just mentioned in the picture, right? So this is the last slide. So this is some cartoon about like updating the antivirus software. So sometimes this can be annoying, right? So okay, so that's all for the malware. So